In this video, I will be answering 4 key questions related to the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Number 1, why is America not putting its foot on the ground? Number 2, why is India sitting on the fence? Number 3, why are analysts saying that the outcome of the war in Ukraine will change the face of European politics? Why will the world never be the same again? And number 4, do economic sanctions really work? Is it enough to punish Russia? Let's address these questions one by one. First of all, why is America not willing to put its foot on the ground? In order to understand this, we just need to keep one thing in mind. It is always easy to enter a war, but it is always difficult to exit one. In order to understand this, let us take the very recent example of Afghanistan. America entered Afghanistan in the late 1980s, and it could exit only by 2021. That is, after spending 4 decades in Afghanistan, after spending trillions of dollars in Afghanistan, after losing thousands of American soldiers, it could exit the war, but only after handing the same Afghanistan back to the same Taliban. Right? America literally lost the war in Afghanistan. Similarly, America has ventured into wars in the Middle East. Right? It has entered into wars in Syria, in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Iraq, and in all these wars, remember, it was easy for America to start them, but it was always difficult to come out of it. And as a result, America has spent considerable part of its history in engaging itself in needless wars, right? In wars that were not needed, in which American presence was not needed, but it anyway got entangled itself in those wars and found it very difficult to exit those. Even today, Middle East, for instance, remains highly destabilized. There are civil wars in Syria, there are civil wars in Yemen, in Lebanon, and much of Iraq and Iran are still destabilized. So there is a general consensus in America that it does not need to get entangled itself in yet another war. We do know that it was under the presidency of Donald Trump that America decided to unwind operations in Afghanistan, and that decision is something that was supported and continued by President Joe Biden. So there is a bipartisan consensus in America that we should not engage ourselves in needless wars anymore. Our focus should be currently on containing China, because that is the single biggest threat to American supremacy in the world. So we will focus our resources on containing China, and we will not engage ourselves in needless wars. So there is no appetite for a war in America. We also need to understand that both America and Russia are nuclear powered nations, right? Currently, the war is between Russia and Ukraine, and therefore it is a regional conflict in a sense. Of course, it is a global conflict in the sense that Ukraine was trying to join NATO or become a part of NATO, and therefore there is obviously European factor to all this, all that's happening. But at the same time, it is localized at the moment. It is between Russia and its neighbor Ukraine. But the moment America steps into this, it will become a global conflict of sorts, and a global conflict between two nuclear powered nations. Now, we need to understand what nuclear powered nations mean. It basically means that both these countries have nuclear weapons, and in case they go to war against each other, the only way by which a nuclear war can end is by mutual destruction of each other, right? So if America decides to use nuclear weapons against Russia or vice versa, in that case, we will see terrible loss of life and property, right? And it would be, a consequence that will be felt all across the world. And nobody wants two nuclear-powered nations, especially Russia and America, which have the largest nuclear stockpiles in the world, right? So if they want, they can completely wipe out humanity from the face of Earth. Such is the level of nuclear weapons with them. So nobody wants these two nations to go head to head against each other. So that's another reason why America is stepping out of it. Now you can counter argue that is Putin not afraid of nuclear war? Is he not afraid of the fact that America can launch nuclear weapons? Well, we don't know what Putin is thinking right now, but the fact that he moved first, he gets the first mover advantage. The fact that he moved first into Ukraine, that is forcing America to think twice, because the moment America steps into this, the whole dynamic of the war changes. It turns into a war between two nuclear power nations, and that will be very destructive for the whole of Earth. So that is why Biden is also thinking twice. Thirdly, also remember that Biden will face midterm elections this year, and any idea of America getting entangled into yet another war will be very difficult to sell politically, right? As I said in the past, currently there is no appetite for war in America, and there is a bipartisan consensus that our main enemy is China. We need to focus on them, and instead of getting entangled in wars. And that is why you've seen that there is a concerted effort to settle conflicts, whether in the Middle East through the Abraham Accords, or whether to settle down things in Europe they are trying to completely focus their resources on China. So there is a bipartisan consensus. We do not need to engage ourselves anymore in wars. And if Biden chooses to go ahead and engage America militarily in Ukraine, then it will be an idea very difficult to sell politically. And there is every reason to believe that Biden may face severe consequences in the midterm elections. Now, if you've been following Western media, American media in particular, you must have come across opinion polls which suggest that Biden's approval ratings in America are currently at the lowest level since he was elected president in November 2020, which basically means that because of COVID and because of whatever America has gone through in the last 1 year or so, that has taken a toll on Biden's popularity. Now, also remember that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge impact the world over. And America, we know, witnessed the largest number of deaths due to the pandemic. So, no doubt its economy is also in doldrums. Also, remember that very recently we had inflation data which suggested that in America, inflation is at a 4 decades high. That is also, again, one of the major reasons why Biden's popularity has taken a hit, right? Because Americans are burning a hole in their pocket for food prices, for gas prices, and this is only going to hurt America more. Now, if America decides to get entangled in a war, it would also mean a huge drain on their economic resources, which again means that it will come back to haunt Biden in terms of high inflation, in terms of a destabilized economy, because we do know that a war simply means draining huge amounts of economic resources, which would have otherwise gone into development in generating jobs, and in economic growth. So there is the economic aspect as well that Biden is very careful about, and he does not want to ruin his chances in domestic politics, because at the end of the day, Biden also needs to think about his survival. At the end of the day, he's also a politician and he's also answerable to his own people. So all these factors combined make it very difficult for America to think about joining a war. Okay, so there is the strain of domestic politics, there is the concern about the economy, plus the concern about two nuclear powers going head to head make it very difficult for Biden to simply go ahead and fight with Russia militarily. There's a very interesting quote which will sum up what I've been saying on reasons why America is not willing to join militarily in defense of Ukraine. Albert Einstein very famously once said that I don't know what weapons will be used for fighting World War IV, but I don't know what weapons will be used for fighting World War III, but I do know that we can only use sticks and stones for fighting World War IV. The underlying context is that since World War III will be fought between nations via nuclear weapons, everything will be destroyed. What will be left is only sticks and stones, which we can use for fighting World War IV. So that is the main reason, two nuclear powers going head to head, literally changes everything. So that is the reason why Biden is not willing to put American military on the ground. The second question that we wanted to address today in this video is why India is sitting on the fence. Now, to give you a very short answer, both America and Russia are good friends of India, and we don't want to upset either Russia or America. With Russia, we have a very long-standing friendship. They have been with us through thick and thin, and in fact, they have been a major global power which has supported India right through our independence days and even before that. America, on the other hand, is a relatively new friend. But this does not mean that America is not important. Remember, it is India's biggest trading partner. And obviously, being a global power, its support to India matters a lot, right? It is good for our rise on the world stage. So we don't want to upset Americans. We don't want to upset Russians. That is why we have taken a neutral stance, right? That is why we are calling for both sides, to talk to each other, to engage in dialogue and diplomacy and find out a peaceful solution for this. Now, there have been some people, who are saying that how can we be, a mute spectator to the inhumanity that Putin is subjecting Ukrainians to? Why can't we take sides? When it comes to international politics, every country has to be selfish. And there is no shame in being selfish for the pursuit of your national interests. Whether it is America, whether it is Russia, or whether it is any global power, all of them are selfish in the pursuit of the national interests. For us as Indians, what should matter at the current moment is to ensure that our relationships with Russia and the United States are intact, that we do not jeopardize our relations. And therefore, we have to be a realist, and if that means a bit selfish, then so be it. It is not as if we are not sympathizing with the Ukrainian people. We are definitely, and we do want the violence and the war to end. But at the same time, we have to guard our national interests as well. upsetting either Russians or Americans will have a long-term impact on our own survival as well. Our economy may take a hit as well, right? Plus, both these global powers have pretty good defense relations with India, so that will also take a hit. So we need to ensure that our interests are protected, and for that reason, we are sitting on the fence. Now, the same Europe which is asking us not to sit on the fence was actually sitting on the fence when the Chinese made incursions in Ladakh. Back then, Europe didn't speak in one voice against China because they have a very good trading relation with China. China has a huge market in Europe. Europe has a huge market in China. Both are bound by trade relations, and therefore Europe didn't condemn when China made incursions into Ladakh. Back then, Europe was driven by its own national interests. Today, India is driven by its own national interests. So there is no, so they cannot say that India is being selfish or India is sitting on the fence. What we're doing is that we are also following our national interests like any other power should. So that is the reason why India is currently sitting on the fence. We have adopted a neutral, a balanced view because we do not want to upset either of our two good friends, that is Russia and the United States of America. Let's come to the third question, which is that why are some people, rather analysts and political commentators, people who keep an eye on global affairs, they are saying that look, the outcome of the war in Ukraine will be very significant. And no matter which way it goes, it is giving you a larger signal about the state of affairs in global politics. And in order to understand what will be the global implications of the outcome of the war in Ukraine, we need to again get back to 1991. 1991 is a very, very crucial year in order to understand international politics. Prior to 1991, the world was actually multipolar. You had two superpowers, the United States of America on the one side and the United Soviet Socialist Republic, or simply the Soviet Union, on the other side. And between them, there was a competition. This competition was not just for greater economic development, for greater access to resources. This fight was not just limited to dominating space, as we know. This was a fight of ideas as well, right? On the one side was the idea of liberal democracy, of human rights, right? And on the other side was the idea of, say, fascist regimes or communist authoritarian regimes where freedom of speech was restricted, where the state controlled the economy, unlike on the other side, which advocated for a liberal economy. So this fight came to an end in 1991 when the Americans won, right? The Soviet Union collapsed. There are various reasons for the collapse of the Soviet Union. We won't get into the details in this video because otherwise this video will be very long. So let's not get into that. But in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed, and with it collapsed the ideas of, say, authoritarianism, communism, and everything that stood in opposition to liberal democracy. 1991 suddenly turned the world from multipolar, or rather bipolar, from the presence of two superpowers, to unipolar, or the presence of one superpower, that is the United States of America. Now, Americans interpreted the 1991 moment as a victory of liberal democracy, as a victory of Western ideas of capitalism, of democracy, of human rights, compared to the Soviet idea of communism, authoritarianism, restrictions of free speech and expression, state control over economy, etc. Now, Americans felt that this was their license to set the terms and conditions of their engagement with the world. In simple words, Americans felt that they could now go around the world, set the terms and conditions, and do whatever they like. So they engaged themselves in multiple wars. They felt it was their duty to export democracies even to countries that were culturally and historically not suited to democracies. So they engaged in toppling regimes, whether in Libya, whether in the Gulf, fought needless wars, and simply, did what a bully does, right? It wouldn't be unfair to say that America behaved as a bully post 1991 because it was the only superpower in the world, right? China back then was slowly rising, but it was still, it was not anywhere near the United States of America. 1991 also meant that Russian economy took a hit, and Russia was nowhere near the superpower that it is now starting to emerge. So 1991 was very crucial in that sense. But if today Russia has already invaded Ukraine, but if today Russia manages to win Ukraine, if it manages to topple regime in Ukraine, if it manages to, say, bring down Zelensky and put a Kremlin puppet into power, then it would signal the emergence of a new superpower. And all of a sudden, the world which turned bipolar to unipolar in 1991 will suddenly turn multipolar in 2022 if Putin manages to win Ukraine. Now, there is every reason to believe that Putin is winning Ukraine, because without the American military, it is only a matter of days before Ukraine either surrenders or falls to Kremlin, right? It is only a matter of days before Russia captures Ukraine completely. So, what does it signal? It signals that America will no longer be the only superpower that the world knew between 1991 and today, that is 2022. It would signal the rise of other superpowers like Russia, like China, and then America will have to accommodate itself. It will have to accept that it is not only the only superpower in the world, that democracy, capitalism, human rights are not the only three ideas, okay, are not are not the only three ideas that will work. Authoritarianism, state control of economy, these are also ideas that will coexist with liberal democracy. This would directly challenge the American conception or the American led conception of the global order, right? Because currently the worldwide belief is that capitalism, okay, that is open economy, a liberal economy, democracy, and human rights, these are the three pillars of our human existence, right? And whichever countries are not following these three principles, they have either gone rogue, like North Korea, or they're simply under the control of dictators, as in Russia or as in China. But the victory of Russia and Ukraine will change this theory completely, right? It will signal the arrival of new superpowers on the world arena, and therefore, it is a direct challenge to the American supremacy. Plus, it also proves the fact, and a lot of people in the international community are discussing this, that America as a global superpower is in decline, right? And what we saw in Afghanistan was actually a trailer, was actually an indicator. And what we will be seeing in Ukraine in a couple of days from now will prove that America as a superpower is on the decline. It is no longer the same superpower that could go around the world, set terms and conditions, topple regimes in other countries, and simply export democracies. Okay, that it is no longer the same superpower that it used to be. And then there are new superpowers, mostly in Asia and in Europe, which are going to challenge American dominance, American supremacy. So that is why analysts believe that if 1991 was important for turning the world into a unipolar, 2022 will be very crucial into turning the world multipolar. And a multipolar world will be very different from a unipolar world. It would mean that American dominance in almost every sphere, technology, whether in technology, whether in terms of ideas, okay, whether in terms of, say, control over global institutions like the United Nations, like the IMF, like the World Bank, all of these, remember, institutions, ideas, everything would be challenged, right? And there will no longer be a single version of what is right and what is wrong, right? There will be multiple interpretations now. So all of this makes 2022 very exciting from the prism of international politics. And that is why analysts believe that the outcome of the war in Ukraine will be very, very important to see. Americans, remember, were defeated in Afghanistan. America will most likely be defeated in Ukraine now because it's not even fighting. Remember, it is responding via military sanctions, economic sanctions, but whether those economic sanctions will work or not is again a huge question mark. And lastly, the fourth question, do economic sanctions work? Well, in 2014, when Russia had annexed Crimea, US had slapped similar sanctions on Russia. Well, whether or not they were as harsh as the current sanctions are, that is debatable, but we do know that in 2014, US had slapped sanctions on Russia, and had sanctions worked back then, Russia would not have invaded Ukraine today. And similarly, look at how sanctions have played out in the past. Look at the fact that US had placed sanctions on Iran, but has sanctions stopped Iran from pursuing nuclear weapons? It hasn't, right? Similar economic sanctions have also been placed on North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Is that stopping Kim Jong-un from launching new missiles every day? It isn't. In fact, if anything, that guy is launching new missiles almost on a daily basis, right? It regularly hits the headlines if you have been following the news. Many people are also drawing a parallel between what happened post-World War I and what is happening today, right? Because after World War I, we do know that Germany was subjected to very large-scale humiliation. Germany lost large parts of its territories. It was forced to pay economic reparations under the Treaty of Versailles, the very infamous Treaty of Versailles. In fact, historians believe that the seeds of the Second World War was actually sown by the Treaty of Versailles itself. If economic sanctions and if those harsh economic sanctions didn't stop Germany from giving rise to someone like Adolf Hitler, will it be enough to stop someone like Vladimir Putin? Well, I would leave it to your wisdom to decide if economic sanctions are going to stop Putin or not. But history tells us, recent both World War One history, both post World War One history, as well as contemporary history tells us that economic sanctions have not stopped dictators, whether it is Putin, whether it is Kim Jong-un, or whether it is in Iran. It hasn't stopped them from pursuing what they think are their national interests. And there is every reason to believe that Russia, even if it suffers temporarily, it will somehow emerge from this crisis and it will be back to business as usual. So let's see if economic sanctions work or not. Let's hope that this analysis is proven wrong. And I would really hope that this analysis is proven wrong, that Russia is indeed taught a lesson and that it does not dare to invade any other neighbor or any other country in the past. But we'll have to wait and watch for that. We'll have to see what kind of economic sanctions actually come up and what effect do they have on Russia. But this is all I have in this video. 4 questions that I wanted to answer. I hope I've been able to declutter some of these questions for you. Do leave your feedback if you feel you've learned something or if you've understood something, and if you have anything to suggest, you can obviously drop down in the comment box. So yeah, that's it in this video. I'll see you in the next one.